And we're going to finish off this beautiful sutta called the Avijja Sutta, the Ignorance Sutta. We have looked at how ignorance is caused by a number of conditions going back, all the way back to associating with the wrong kind of people. And that's kind of interesting because it gives us an idea of what we really need to be doing to get this path going, what sort of things that we need to focus on, and then the path really comes together as a consequence. So now what I want to do is to have a look at the reverse of the situation. So we're going to start with the goal of the path, which is like freedom and knowledge, understanding and freedom. And this beautiful combination of qualities, both understanding and freedom coming together. It's kind of marvelous. And then go back stage by stage and kind of see the reverse sequence going back, and we're going to discuss it a little bit from that point of view. So this sequence now starts off, and the Buddha says, I say that knowledge and freedom are fueled by something. They are not unfueled. And what is the fuel for knowledge and freedom? And so here we now have the opposite of avijja. Before avijja was ignorance. Now we have knowledge. So knowledge is the opposite of avijja. So it's vijja. The A is like a negation in Pali. It makes it negative. So now we have knowledge. Knowledge means really understanding of the nature of things. It's a kind of one of these many words that have to do with understanding in Buddhism, like yata buddha nanadasana is one of the famous ones. Yata buddha nanadasana, seeing knowledge and vision in accordance with reality, seeing things in accordance with reality, one of these words. So it's one of these great things that I find so, many things are so attractive about Buddhism. I don't know anything unattractive. Well, actually that's exaggerating. There's so many wonderful things about this teaching. And the idea of understanding reality is kind of one of those beautiful, really beautiful aspects. So knowledge is really kind of the wrong translation here. Insight, I think, is a far better translation for Vijja, because it is understanding things in a deep way. It is not a superficial knowledge, something you paste, you put into your CV saying, I'm PhD or something. And I apologize to those PhD candidates that are here. There's a couple of PhD candidates. Well done on your PhD, but this is even better, right? So that's a PhD. This is the PhD of Buddhism, the Vijja at the end of the path. So real understanding, and then of course, as I have been trying to say all along, with that understanding comes the ability to choose properly, to know what is good, what is bad, to know where happiness is found, to know how to avoid suffering, all of these things. And that, of course, is then tantamount on the Buddhist path to freedom, liberation, right? Does anyone here who does not want to be free? Anyone would rather be imprisoned? In that case, I would suggest you leave now before it's too late, because you might get free if you listen to this, right? You might be on the wrong path if you don't want freedom. I think if you don't want freedom, it's basically because you don't understand what it is. Everybody wants freedom. Nobody wants to be imprisoned. Nobody wants to be shackled and tied down to kind of things and make you unable to make your own choices. One of those very interesting ideas that is often discussed in Western philosophy is the idea of freedom of the will. What is freedom of the will then? And very often the idea in Western society is kind of, to me, they're missing the point of what freedom of the will really is about. It's about whether things are predetermined or whether there is an ability to make free choices. That's kind of usually what the idea of freedom of the will revolves around, if I understand the discussion correctly. It's not that I'm far from being an expert on these things. So if I got it completely wrong, it would be surprising again. But that's my understanding. Usually it means, is your choice predetermined, or do you have the ability to kind of go beyond those predeterminations to make a free choice? And in Buddhism, that's kind of missing the point, because even if you can make a free choice, you are so blinded and so deluded, you're still going to make stupid choices. So what's the point of having a free choice? You're going to make a stupid choice, whether it's free will or not. You're going to make the same kind of stupid choice anyway. So it's kind of pretty useless. So in Buddhism, freedom of choice means that your mind is clear enough so you understand the difference between happiness and suffering. So having a freedom of the will means reducing the defilements, clear your mind, so you actually can see what is to your benefit. That is when you can make good choices. That kind of freedom is the freedom that matters. Not the freedom of whether you can, whether you are fully conditioned or not. That's kind of irrelevant. That is a much more beautiful idea of freedom, because then you actually, you know that what you're doing is useful. And this is the freedom of the Buddhist path. The freedom comes from the elimination of the defilements of the mind, because these are tyrants that destroy your ability to make good choices, to move in the right way, because you don't see what's going on. Take those away, and you feel peaceful, you're at ease, you are calm, you have access to bliss and happiness whenever you want it through deep meditation, and all of these things. So that is the kind of freedom we want. Freedom of the highest bliss in the world. Nibbana paramang sukhang. Nibbana is the highest bliss. Is anyone who wants to stay after all? Good idea to stay, right? This is where all of this leads. Highest freedom, highest happiness, end of all suffering. There's something very powerful about this path, very compelling. It drives you on. It's very hard to kind of overlook this and to say, nah, that you kind of really have to do these things. So knowledge and freedom at the very end of the path, they are fueled. What are they fueled by? The 7 factors of awakening. Satta, sappho-janga. What are the 7 factors of awakening? Well, they are the cause for freedom and knowledge. They are the cause for the very end of the Buddhist path. And what they are really the factors of meditation. Ending in samadhi and ending in upekkha, which is equanimity, the very end of the jhana states in the Noble Eightfold Path. This is all about meditation practice, especially about samadhi. That is what the 7 factors of awakening are about. The 7 factors start with sati, mindfulness, which is ordinary meditation practice, watching the breath or whatever, and they end with a kind of very profound meditations that actually lead to real equanimity of the mind, the upekkha, or the 4th jhana, and maybe even beyond. It's all about meditation, taking it all the way to the limit, and then from those 4 jhanas, awakening happens. Whether you want to or not, you're going to be awakened. If you don't want to be awakened, you don't do this kind of practice. So, right? So again, it reinforces this point, and you see again and again in the suttas, and the thing that leads to awakening in the suttas is not sati, mindfulness on its own. It's not vipassana on its own. The thing that leads to awakening in the suttas is always samadhi. Samadhi is a critical thing. Samadhi means deep meditation. I apologize for sometimes using all this Pali word, but samadhi means deep meditation. That's really what it means. Really, really, really deep. That is the cause for awakening. It's always the same thing in the suttas. And we live in the world with any vipassana is considered to be the solution to everything. But actually, if you read the suttas, it takes only 2 suttas to read, and you know straight away that actually the thing that leads to seeing things according to reality is always samadhi, always deep meditation. Of course, vipassana and samatha, calm and insight, always go together. They're not really separable. So there's a lot of insight that comes with that deep meditation. But the critical thing is that we always need to go via deep meditation. So the vipassana that you do should lead to deep meditation. The samatha you do should lead to deep meditation. Samatha means calm. Vipassana means clear seeing. Insight, I don't like insight. Insight is vijja. Clear seeing is better. You see things clearly, what is going on. And that was quite nice. I once wrote to Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi because I was working with him quite closely on some translations. And I said to him, I don't think Vipassana should be translated as insight. And he said to me, I agree. It's like, yay, he agreed. It's always nice when you feel that you're hit upon something. Someone who is more knowledgeable than you are, they kind of agree with your little insights. And it was really cool. But then he said, first he said, I agree. And then he said, but. And the word insight has become so standard, we can't change it. We still have to keep insight, even though it is the wrong translation. Okay. So it was a little bit disappointing. But he had a point, right? That we cannot change things all the time. If we do, we lose that sense of continuity and understanding. People get very confused after a while, especially with the same translator. So he has a point. But again, awakening jhanas are the critical thing here. And then the Buddha says, I say that the 7 awakening factors are fueled by something. They are not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the 7 awakening factors? You should say the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 satipatthanas. Yeah, the 4 satipatthanas, what do they lead to? They lead to samadhi. It's like kind of extraordinary. This is so interesting. I mean, in fact, when you start looking at the sutras, this is true everywhere. Satipatthana always leads to samadhi. The purpose of satipatthana practice is to achieve samadhi. Remember, as I said at the very beginning, I said that if you want to understand the teaching of the Buddha, you have to focus on the 37 bodhipakkhya-dhammas, the 37 aids to awakening. That is what the Buddha said. This is my teaching. Yeah? This is a critical, what Buddhism really is about, if you want to kind of pin it down. What do these 37 factors of awakening, aids to awakening say? Well, Noble Eightfold Path, Sammasati leads to Sammasamadhi, right mindfulness, which is Satipatthana, leads to right concentration or right stillness, Sammasamadhi. 5 faculties, the Panchindriya, the indriya of Sati leads to the indriya of Samadhi. Sati leading to Samadhi, Satipatthana leading to Samadhi. The 7 factors of awakening we have just been looking at now, they start off with Sati and end with Samadhi. Same thing again. It's everywhere. All of these sequences are causal, one thing leading to the next one. They are said to be causal in various places in the sutras. And still, we kind of have this idea in the Buddhist world. It's kind of remarkable how the evidence is so incredibly strong. And yet nobody seems to kind of get, not nobody, that's kind of a real absolute exaggeration. A lot of, still, we live under this influence that Satipatthana is actually the purpose, is insight. It's not that the purpose is not insight. Sure, the purpose is insight, but the purpose of Satipatthana and insight and samatha, all of that is to lead to samadhi, first of all, then the real insights can happen. That is such a powerful thing to realize, and the only reason why people don't see this is because you go into certain retreats, and the only sutta that you're taught on these retreats is the Satipatthana Sutta. And you're not even taught that sutta in the right way. Even that is kind of, enmeshed in mythology and misunderstanding and all of these kind of things. And this is part of the problem of the Buddhist path. You need, especially when it comes to Satipatthana, you need to have a broad outlook, a broad understanding of what is going on. Here is just another example of this sequence that you see everywhere in the suttas. These are really low-hanging fruit. You can barely open a sutta without getting this point straight away. You have jhana everywhere. Satipatthana leading to it. These are kind of the obvious things in the suttas. We don't even, it's kind of interesting how even the most obvious things are misunderstood, let alone the refined points. So forget about the refined points, just get the obvious points. Then you're already going to do better than a lot of people who are, it's not their fault, because we are taught these things. It's kind of the way that the world has been working for a long time. And you have to be a bit adventurous to step outside of those traditions. Sometimes you get kicked out of those traditions if you step outside, that's the problem. So they become a bit like a cult, right? This is kind of problematic. We have cults in Buddhism. Now you have come to the Brahmali cult. Are you scared? Oh, the Brahmali cult. This is the best cult, right? Whatever I say, believe it. No, don't do that, right? If I say something, investigate it for yourself. I mean, this is kind of the whole point of what I'm saying. And I'm quite happy when people disagree with me. It's good, yeah? If you have your own opinions about things, great. But just keep on investigating. Don't stop there with disagreeing with me. Okay. So, let's carry on. The other 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation. This is all about meditation, yeah? Mindfulness of breathing, all of that. I say that the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation are fueled by something. They are not unfueled. And what is the fuel of the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation then? And you should say the 3 kinds of good conduct. Yeah, this is what I've been saying all along, that it is kindness, it is good conduct, that is the source of meditation, makes meditation possible. Remember, good conduct by body, speech, and mind. Yeah, so it's a very broad category in Buddhism. Don't do the bad stuff, do the good stuff. That is the source of meditation practice. This fits exactly with the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path, you have all the kinds of virtue, yeah, right action, right speech, right action, right livelihood. Then you have right effort, which has all to do with the mind and making the mind clear. Yeah, so it's exactly the same sequence as you see in the Noble Eightfold Path. Then you have the mindfulness, then you have samadhi. This is what I was saying before. This sequence here is actually just an alternative expression of the Noble Eightfold Path, because the path is the same. So we should expect there to be overlap. If there is no overlap, there is a problem. The path should always be approximately the same, just like different angles. Yeah, good conduct is the cause of meditation. So if you want to know why your meditation is not as good as you would like to be, that's almost everybody. Yeah, that's where you should focus. How can I change my thinking mind? How can I have more compassion? How can I have more care for everyone around me? How can I understand people better instead of judging them all the time? All of these things, this is the holy grail of Buddhist meditation practice. We don't have holy grails in Buddhism, it's a Christian idea, but nevertheless, if there were a holy grail in Buddhism, that would be it. Yeah? So always, that's where you need to investigate. How come my meditation isn't super duper? How come I'm missing out every time I sit down? How come sometimes I'm falling asleep and all these kind of things? There is a reason for that. And the reason is to be found primarily in conduct. And I'm not suggesting that you are all bad people. That's not the point. I know that you're all good people, actually. You're already really good, but the bar in Buddhism is incredibly high. Yeah? It's not enough to be good. You want to be really good. You want to be super duper good. Yeah, don't want to be goody, that's kind of a bad thing, but you want to have a good heart in the most profound way possible. So you investigate yourself, and you have to be really honest, open about what your defilements and problems are, and then you're going to have success on this path. So very important. And I always, at the end of every retreat, well, this is not the end yet, we've still got a few days left, but I always say to people, there's only one thing that you need to remember. After 10 days, people are utterly confused about what I'm talking about. Talking about this, that, whoa, what should I remember? Too many things, right? And sometimes it's true, we're talking about too many things. So you need to summarize it into something that everyone can take home. And 10 days of meditation can be summarized into one word. Isn't that great? It's really nice. So everything we've done, keep all these things at the back of your mind. You don't have to remember all of these things. The idea is just to get your feeling for Buddhism, how it works, strengthen your confidence and faith in this teaching. That's really the purpose of all this. At the end of the day, there's only one word you can recall. That single word is not samadhi, not mindfulness, right? Isn't that interesting? Not mindfulness, not faith, not... The single word to remember is kindness. If you can remember kindness, and you can practice that consistently in your daily life, in your speech, in your actions, in your thoughts, you're going to go a very long way on this path. It is about consistency. It's about doing it again and again and again, every moment, yeah, all the time. That is where kind of the whole thing of the Buddhist path lies. And so that is really this kind of powerful image at the back of your mind. Kindness is where it is at. And when you get that strongly embedded in your mind, embedded in your mindfulness, you will remember it as you meet people in your daily life all the time. So this is kind of the thing. So now what I'm going to teach you now is the causes for that kindness. So we can learn how to embed this in our mind in a more powerful way. It is so easy when you are on retreat. It's easy when you hear these teachings, and it's kind of nice and inspiring. You're in a nice environment, people coming together, right? And you will remember this as soon as you go back home and you start work out the window. Isn't that, it's true, isn't it? I know that myself. I go back to the monastery, I start doing all kind of things. Actually, I do too many things right now, but right now it's quite nice because I'm still quite focused. But sometimes you get involved with too many worldly things and you forget kindness. And that is where the problem is. So how do we not forget kindness? This is what the rest of this path is about. So listen. Okay, so the Buddha said, I say that the three kinds of good conduct are fueled by something. They are not unfueled. And what is the fuel for the three kinds of good conduct? You should say sense restraint. Because when we restrain the senses, what we are doing, we are purifying the mind. That means you complete the three kinds of good conduct. Yeah, they get really completed through that. I said that sense restraint is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for sense restraint? You should say mindfulness and situational awareness. Yeah, when you have that clarity about what you should be doing, what you should not be doing, having some clarity about doing those things in your life that leads to better qualities and not doing those things that lead to bad qualities, then you're on the right track. Sense restraint becomes possible when you don't go and hang out in the wrong places. If you go to the pub, sense restraint is going to be out of the window, especially if you start drinking and you hang out with your mates at the pub. Or you go into the, it's even just going to a movie. If you go to a movie, you lose sense restraint. The whole purpose of seeing a movie, I'm not saying you should never go to the movies. Please go to movies. What I'm saying is that what you will notice when you go to a movie is that you lose your sense restraint. You get completely involved. You start crying, right? When the hero cries, that means no sense restraint, right? It means you're utterly involved in that movie. You become a character in that movie yourself. You identify with the person, the hero or the heroine of that movie. So the Buddha actually says that seeing shows is the antithesis, is the opposite of sense restraint. This is how you know, you figure out what you are supposed to do. But don't be, I'm not saying you should be a complete tilt, not having any fun in life. See movies, do whatever you like, but notice the effect and then see what happens, what it does to you. I said that mindfulness and situational awareness is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for mindfulness and situational awareness? You should say proper attention. Yoniso manasikara. Knowing how to attend in the world, moment to moment, day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, maybe life in, life out. No one else says life in, life out. I think that's a new coinage, life in, life out, life out. But I like that coinage. So, the idea of always having a feeling for your attention. How are you attending to things? How are you looking at the people around you? Are you coming from goodwill? Or are you coming from fault finding? That kind of thing? You know you're attending in the right way to things. When you see the sensory world, are you attending, oh, wonderful, let me attach to everything around me? Or are you thinking, okay, hold on a moment, maybe there's a downside to this right attention. Knowing how to look at everything around you, focus on anything you focus on in the right way, coming from the right place. There's a very powerful thing, this Yoniso manasikara. If you want to read about it, have a look at Majjhima 2, the Savasava Sutta. Beautiful sutta. I used that as a foundation for a retreat a few years ago, and it was actually turned out very, very well. The name of the retreat was, what was it again? Reflecting Wisely, I think. Yes, the whole retreat was a Reflecting Wisely based on that sutta. Anyway, what is the fuel for proper attention? You should say faith. I discussed this before, how faith in the teaching, confidence in the teachings allows you to pay proper attention because you're following the advice of the Buddha. I said faith is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel of faith? You should say listening to the true teachings. I said that listening to the true teachings is fueled by something. It is not unfueled. And what is the fuel for listening to the true teachings? Associating with superior people. It says good people, but really superior people is the right word. In other words, the Aryas, the noble ones, those who have true insight into reality. Associate with them. That is the root of everything. That is the root of this path. If you want to be kind, if you want to have success on this path in the right way, if you want to have Yoniso manasikara, attend rightly in the world, what you really need to do is to associate with the right kind of people. And as I mentioned before, the main person to associate with is the Buddha. And it's kind of marvelous that we have the ability to associate with the Buddha even in the present day. Because when you read the suttas, the Buddha is teaching you, whether you want to or not, he's teaching at that time. You can't avoid listening to the Buddha when you read these things. So you can still be in the presence of the Buddha 2,500 years after he lived. One of those amazing things that I always think about when I think about the Buddha, when the Buddha started his teaching career, he said that I'm setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma, the Dhammacakka-pavatana. Pavatana means putting in motion. Dhammacakka is the wheel of the Dhamma. He's setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. And what that means is that once you start these teachings, they are so powerful that people will listen. Like the first 5 disciples, they will really listen to these teachings. And because they listen, they will understand. One of those amazing things that happens in the Dhammacakka-pavatana Sutta is that Kondanya, one of the 5 disciples, he understands what the Buddha is saying. And the Buddha is like, wow. Yeah, not exactly, it's almost like wow. Yeah, the Buddha says, Kondanya understands. Kondanya understands. It is like saying, wow, basically, it's the same thing, just in different words. And he was amazed because he didn't expect anyone to be able to understand these teachings. They're so profound. But they work, yeah? They actually work. That ability to understand something so profound, something that goes so much against our nature, that is why the Buddha was so surprised. So the Buddha sets in motion this wheel of the Dhamma in the world, sets it rolling. And what that means is that this rolls on from one century to another century, from one millennium, or millennia, whatever it is, to another millennium, from one culture to another culture, one nation to another nation. And now it is finally coming to Belgium, or wherever it is, right? It is rolling on everywhere, coming to Australia, coming to, the next frontier is Mars probably, but we'll wait, we'll see if the Martians are interested in Dhamma or not. But if there are living beings there, they too would be interested in Dhamma. Everyone would be interested in this, because a living being, by definition, is something or someone that experiences the world. And once you experience the world, once you have feelings, then the Dhamma is for you. Specifically, the Sutta that says that this teaching is meant for those that feel. Yeah, so everyone basically. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that when the Buddha started his teachings, because he knew that he was setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma, that it would roll on in the world, yeah, in this way. He actually knew that he was teaching at that very time. He was teaching people also in the future. He was teaching people in other countries. He had this in mind when he was teaching this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used this idea of setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. He knew that something very large was going on. He understood that this was going to carry on for a long time into the future. So when he formulated his teachings, he would specifically have formulated them in a way that would be understandable to people regardless of where they are, who they are, regardless of the culture. He would focus on universal aspects of what it means to be a human being. And this is why we can all understand these teachings. This one is so powerful. If you compare the teachings of the Buddha to many of the other ancient teachings of the world, yeah, you compare it, for example, to some of the teachings in the Upanishads, the ancient Vedas. Dare I say, if you compare it to the Old Testament, for example, of the Abrahamic religions, it is so different. Yeah, it's a very, very different thing. Those other teachings are taught to a specific culture, to specific people in a specific place. They are kind of parochial. They are religions meant for a specific place, for specific people. Whereas, like the God in the Old Testament is a God of the Jewish people, right? Yahweh is kind of the God of the Jewish people. There's a covenant between that God and the Jewish people. And if you look at the old ancient Vedas, they kind of use all the magic and all the rituals and all the culture of that ancient Indian civilization in them. It's very tied to time and place. Whereas the Buddhist teachings have this universal feel about them. It's a very different kind of religion. It's a religion that we feel is large and broad and encompasses everything. This is the powerful thing about the teaching. The Buddha taught in this way. He knew he was teaching for the future. So he knew, in a way, he knew not literally, but metaphorically. He knew that there were people coming to Belgium, sitting together in the loft of a barn with bisons outside. I don't think he knew about the bisons, but he knew about everything else. But yeah, in a sense he knew this. Okay, he didn't know specifically about this, but he knew about the general setup. So when he gave these teachings, he gave it to people like us, sitting together in this way, 2,500 years later. He's teaching you, teaching me, he's teaching every one of us. When we read this teaching, it's not some kind of theoretical abstraction that he is far away. He actually has us in mind, because he has everyone in mind who wants to listen to these teachings. The Buddha is your teacher. He thought about you when he gave these teachings. Think about that. It's kind of, wow. Yeah, and that is when you get a little bit of goosebumps. That's when you start to really get inspired, start to take every word really seriously. If the Buddha is teaching me, I better listen to what he has to say. Yeah, every word matters. Every little instruction. If the Buddha tells you to be kind, and he is telling you, make no mistake, he's telling you to be kind. Are you going to take it seriously? Or are you going to just shrug your shoulders and walk out? You take it seriously, right? This is kind of the whole point of this. So, this is one way of becoming a disciple of the Buddha. I'm going to talk about this later on, because this whole idea of being a disciple of the Buddha rather than being a disciple of this person or that person is a very powerful idea. And it gives you access to these wonderful teachings in an entirely new way that you otherwise would never have. It's a beautiful thing. So hang out with the Buddha, right? And as you hang out with the Buddha, this whole sequence happens. Yeah, then from that associating with the Buddha comes hearing the good teachings, then comes the faith, then comes the protection, all the way up to liberation, just by hanging out with the right kind of people. Who else should you hang out with then? Hang out with those people you have a degree of confidence and faith in, those people who represent the teachings of the Buddha in a good way. You feel that they're giving you the right view of these teachings. It's not some kind of random view and their own ideas, but actually they're really trying to present these teachings in the right way. Yeah, those people who have the qualities that are remarkable and align with those teachings, that is where you can also find a little bit of refuge, but not too much. And then, of course, all your friends in this life, yeah, all the people who come here, we're all friends together, we all kalyanamittras, we all support each other, we all encourage each other in practicing the path in the right way. It's important to have that encouragement. And if you do live far away from, fellow Buddhists or whatever, use the internet to support you. It's a wonderful thing in the modern day that we have the internet where you can see, hear talks, and you can kind of be part of Zoom meetings or whatever. This is a wonderful thing, and we should use that for whatever it is worth. The modern technology has a lot of great advantages also for Buddhism. A lot of bad sides, but many good sides. Let's kind of read the last simile here, the simile here, which really brings all of this together. And it goes like this. It is like when it rains heavily on a mountaintop, and the water flows downhill to fill the hollows, the crevices, and the creeks. As they become full, they fill up the pools fill up the lakes fill up the streams fill up the rivers, and as the rivers become full, they fill up the ocean. That is the fuel for the ocean, and that is how it is filled up. In the same way, associating with good people fills up listening to the true teachings. Listening to the true teachings fills up faith. Faith fills up proper attention. Proper attention fills up mindfulness, etc., etc., all the way to filling up knowledge and freedom. That is the ocean in this simile. Yeah. So if it rains on that mountain, the rain here symbolizes hanging out with the noble ones, listening to the good teachings. And what this symbol is saying, if you just keep that rain going on the mountaintop, eventually, if it rains and rains and rains and never stops raining, it fills up, first of all, the little creeks, the tiny little streams going down the hill. Then that, if it keeps on raining, that will fill up the small lakes. If it keeps on raining, those small lakes will overflow and go into the larger lakes. If it keeps on raining, those large lakes also overflow and go into the streams. If it keeps on raining, the streams will swell and become large and go into the rivers. Like the river Ganges, for example, is a magnificent river in the world. If you haven't seen it, it's really kind of awesome river, the river Ganges. The river Ganges will swell. And of course, eventually, all of that will reach the ocean. And there's only one condition that is required for this to happen. And that is that the rain on the mountaintop never stops. That is the only thing that is required. So please ensure that the rain never stops. The rain means coming back to these teachings, allowing yourself to be influenced by this marvelous word of the Buddha. Listen again and again and again. And as you, whenever you feel a little bit down or you feel like you're losing your way a little bit, come back to this Dhamma teaching to inspire you, to lift you up, to allow you to move forward on this path. This is what this is about. Keep the rain going, keep the rain going. When you forget you forget kindness in your life, come back to these teachings to remind you of the importance of kindness. When you hear these teachings, any good teaching will remind you of that every time. And hopefully even the way that the talk is delivered or the teaching is delivered is such that it actually reminds you of kindness, not only in words, but also in the way it actually is done. That is the ideal way that these Dhamma talks should be delivered. It's a good feeling and also an important message at the same time. So there you are. I don't know, I find that simile so inspiring and so beautiful. Yeah, keep the rain going. Yeah. As you keep that rain going, and eventually liberation will be yours. Wow, okay. Something. Excellent. Okay, so the reason I wanted a little bit of a break there because we're going to move on now, and we're going to move on in a very different way. And really, this should be the end of the talk, right? What I just said now, and everyone should kind of sit down and meditate because it's kind of inspiring. So I feel a bit bad about this, but now I'm going to go into more kind of dry territory. Actually, we have a Q&A afterwards anyway, so it doesn't really matter so much. So now I'm going to come back to the Digha Nikaya 15, the Great Discourse on Causation, and I want to finish that off. And then once that is finished off, we're going to move to the second part of this retreat, which is the dependent liberation things. So tomorrow we should be getting into that quite easily. So continuing on this is now we're going to talk about the idea of the self. Remember that one of the important points of this Maha-Nidana Sutta, the Great Discourse on Causation, is this mutual dependency of consciousness and nama rupa, name and form. Yeah? Name and form, quite literally, is interesting. As someone asked about this today, but name, why is name used there? What has that got to do with things? And name is a very important part of what the mind does. So naming things, yeah, has to do with our perception of the world, has to do with our volition, how we kind of meet the world. This is a very important aspect of the mind. So here, these mental factors, name is used as a way of describing or summarizing these mental factors. But so one of the most important points of the Maha-Nidana Sutta is to show this mutual dependency of consciousness on the one hand, name and form on the other hand, to show that nothing is really permanent, everything depends on something else, nothing can be abstracted out and separated. And so non-self is kind of one of the key ideas in the Maha-Nidana Sutta. And that's why now it continues with this idea. We can discuss more the idea of self and non-self and how to understand this in the right way. It's going to be much more dry here onwards, but Nonetheless, I would say it's going to be interesting regardless. So the next section here is called Describing the Self. And how do those who describe the self describe it? They describe it as physical and limited. Myself is physical and limited. Or they describe it as physical and unlimited. Myself is physical and unlimited. Or they describe it as formless and limited. Myself is formless and limited. Or they describe it as formless and unlimited. Myself is formless and unlimited. So I told you it's going to get a bit more dry. So we need more rain, that's exactly right. So what is this all about? Why does the Buddha even say this? The idea here, remember, one of the things that the Buddha has to do, he has to show all manifestations of the idea of the self. Yeah? The idea of self can manifest many different ways within a person, and you can have theories about the self that are very varied. So what the Buddha is doing here is showing some of the main ideas of the self that the people in the world have. You know? So we have the idea that the self is physical is not a great translation. Really what it means is it has form. Yeah? The Pali word is rupa. Rupa means, it's better to translate rupa as form. It does have a physical aspect, but when it comes to meditation and the sense of self, it is more related to form than to physical things necessarily. And the reason I say that is because most of these ideas that the self is physical and limited, they come from meditation practice. A meditation practice, you don't really have a physical idea as such, but you have an idea of forms that you see in meditation. And then depending on how profound your meditation is, those forms are going to be limited or unlimited. Yeah, more shallow meditation is limited, and deeper meditation is unlimited. This is very often where these self-ideas arise from meditation practice. So that's two of them. And then you have the two others, which are formless. Yeah, you go beyond the realm of form, become formless and unlimited. I prefer unlimited to infinite anyway. And then you have this other thing here, which is formless and limited, which is a little bit more difficult to explain in terms of meditation practice, because in the suttas there is nothing that corresponds to that kind of meditation. But I guess there are perceptions you can have that sort of fit with that, yeah, presumably. Yeah. Or you can make it up, just make it up, make up kind of your theory, whatever it is. So these things are related to meditation practice, and there are various ways of thinking about the self, right? So then the Buddha says, now take those who describe the self as having form and being limited. They describe the self as having form and limited in the present, or in some future life, or else they think, though it is not like that, I will ensure it is provided with what it needs to become like that. So this is another dimension of describing the self. Yeah, either you have the self now, the self is here, and kind of you go into meditation, you see the self. Yeah, I see the self. Yeah, all the bliss. Wow, that is the self. This must be the self because it's so happy. So that is how you kind of come to that conclusion in the present. Or you may think, yeah, I see the self now, but it really only becomes established in the future after I die. Yeah. Okay, that's kind of the future that he's talking about here now. Or else you think, though it is not like that, I will ensure it is provided with what it needs to become like that. This is the idea that if you practice a spiritual path, then you will achieve this kind of self that has form and that is limited. Yeah, through the spiritual practice, I will get that result. So again, the idea is just that there are different ways of talking about the self. Yeah, you don't have to worry too much about what these things mean. The Buddha is trying to kind of encompass all ideas in the world that could somehow be related to the self, so no one can sneak the self through the kind of the kind of fort that the Buddha is trying to create to kind of capture all these ideas, like the Brahma Jala, the net of Brahma, or whatever. So, various ways in which the self can be conceived. This being so, it is appropriate to say that the view of the self as having form and being limited underlies them. It underlies these ideas. These ideas kind of have to do with that. Now take those who describe the self as having form and being unlimited, being formless and limited, formless and unlimited. They describe the self as formless and unlimited in the present, or in some future life, or else they think, though it is not like that, I will ensure through spiritual practice or whatever, that it is provided with what it needs to become like that. This being so, it is appropriate to say that the view of self as formless and unlimited underlies them. That is how they describe the self. That is how those who describe the self describe it. Or should really be, that's how those who describe a self describe it, right? The self, it sounds like there is a self there. That's very unfortunate. Anyway, this is how one must have arguments. We argue about translation. Should it be the or a? And that's kind of one of the critical things right there. So the/a argument. So then comes not describing the self. This will be the opposite. How do those who don't describe the self not describe it? They don't describe a self having form and being limited. They don't describe a self having form and being unlimited. They don't describe a self being formless and limited, and they don't describe a formless self that is unlimited. Myself is formless and unlimited. They don't describe that. Now take those who don't describe the self as having form and limited, having form and being unlimited, being formless and limited, and being formless and unlimited. They don't describe the self as having form. And now it's totally form. What happened? It was physical before, formless. Formless and unlimited in the present, nor in some future life, nor do they think, though it is not like that, I will ensure it is provided with what it needs to become like that. This being so, it is appropriate to say that the view of self or formless and unlimited does not underlie them. That is how those who don't describe the self don't describe it. So the Buddha is making a distinction here between ordinary people and the noble ones. The noble ones have no description of a self. They don't say these things. Whereas ordinary people will tend to say these things. If you're a Buddhist, you won't say it, even though you may actually feel that there is a self in there. You will not say it because you know it is basically not right according to Buddhism. But it's really coming from faith for most people. So the Buddha is just making a distinction here between how to speak about things in the right way, how you can understand whether someone is attached to the idea of a self or not. That's really all it is. It sounds very kind of weird, but this is how the suttas are. So that is the describing of that. Now the next passage, just to make things even more kind of just to add to what we're doing already, that comes the regarding of a self. So first is the describing of self, that comes the regarding a self. So how do those who regard a self regard it? They regard feeling as self. Feeling is myself. Or they regard it like this. Feeling is definitely not myself. Myself does not experience feeling. Or they regard it like this. Feeling is definitely not myself. But it's not that my feeling does not experience feeling. Myself feels, for myself is liable to feel. So these are kind of people who have too much time thinking, is kind of what they come up with there. So what the point of this is just to say that there is different ways we can relate a self to feeling. Either the feeling actually is, you take that to be me, this is me, the feeling is me, Or you can say the feeling is not me, got nothing to do with it, I'm separate, the feeling is something else. Or you can say that I have a self, it is not feeling, but it is subject to feeling. Yeah, I feel with the self that I have. So these are three different ways of relating the self, the so-called self, self, your theory of self, whatever it is, to feelings. This is kind of interesting, right? Once you start, at least I find it interesting. So this is fascinating, because here we are kind of getting to the nitty-gritty of what really is self, what it really is all about. And you will notice, as I mentioned before, that the idea of feeling is very important. The Buddha picks out feeling and relates that to the self. He doesn't pick out perception or the will or consciousness, he picks out feeling. And of course, the reason why he does that, as I mentioned before, is a very fertile ground for insight and understanding. If you understand feeling properly, basically everything else also tends to fall into place as a consequence. Why? Because feeling is what makes life meaningful. If you understand fully that this is problematic, you can't hold on to it, you can't have it the way you want, you can't control it, and all of these things, well then actually life itself kind of becomes pointless. So, this is why Buddhism gets such a bad name, right? Life is pointless. Okay, so now comes the Buddha's argument. Yeah, so if people have these views about feeling, now Buddha is going to give us the argument why all of these views are problematic. And this is quite rare in the suttas. It's a particularly interesting passage that you don't really find anywhere else in the suttas, especially for those of you who are really into the suttas. And I know some of you are really sutta nerds, just like me. I'm also a sutta nerd and take such pride in being a sutta nerd. So, yeah, so this is kind of this is fairly unique, I think, to this particular sutta. I cannot say with absolute certainty it's not found anywhere else, but it is fairly unique to this sutta. So the Buddha says, now as to those who say feeling is myself, you should say this to them. Reverend, there are three feelings, pleasant, painful, and neutral. Which one of these do you regard as self? Ananda, at the time when you feel a pleasant feeling, you don't feel a painful or neutral feeling. You only feel a pleasant feeling. At the time when you feel a painful feeling, you don't feel a pleasant or neutral feeling. You only feel the painful feeling. At the time when you feel a neutral feeling, you don't feel a pleasant feeling or a painful feeling. You only feel a neutral feeling. This is kind of the critical point here, yeah? That you can only feel one of these things at the time. Yeah, sometimes it feels like everything is enmeshed with each other. You feel a bit of pleasure, a bit of pain, a bit of neutrality, and it's kind of all a big mess, stirred up in some kind of cauldron or whatever. And it's really hard to kind of take these things apart. But sometimes this is one of the reasons why deep meditation is very useful, because that is a time when you only experience pleasure for a very long period of time with no suffering whatsoever. Then you know that suffering feelings are completely ceased. You know that painful feelings cannot be you because you can't even access them. Nor do you have neutral feelings at that time, so that too cannot really be you. And then you come back to the ordinary world, you feel pain, and all that bliss is gone. Yeah, no happiness whatsoever. You're really miserable. Yeah, really sad. Oh no, the happiness disappeared. So this is what the Buddha says. You can only feel one thing at a time. So what that means, yeah, if you take one thing to be yourself and not the other ones, well, then your self disappears. Yeah, if pain, happy feeling is you, and that is the obvious one to take as yourself, that happy feeling is gone. What happened to myself? I'm gone. The me is gone. And that's problematic, right? That's very unpleasant when you feel that what you take to be you has disappeared. So this is the argument the Buddha is making, and it's a very powerful argument, because this is the insight that we are striving for. And the deeper your samadhi, the more ability you will have to kind of pick these feelings apart and see their discreteness. They are discrete. One stops, another begins. They don't continue into each other. They don't overlap. They become more. And this is where I think a lot of the idea of momentariness And you find in the Abhidhamma comes from this idea of feelings and everything happening in kind of packages, yeah, one thing at a time. But the Abhidhamma takes it way too far, in my opinion. Anyway, let's not go there. Yeah. And then the Buddha says that painful feelings, pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neutral feelings are all impermanent, conditioned, dependently originated, liable to end, vanish, fade away, and cease. There's no such thing as a permanent feeling. It's impossible to have a permanent feeling. That's what the Buddha says here. You just need to investigate it, and you will figure it out yourself. When feeling a pleasant feeling, they think, this is myself. When the pleasant feeling ceases, they think, myself has disappeared. When feeling a painful feeling, they think, this is myself. When the painful feeling ceases, they think, myself has disappeared. When feeling a neutral feeling, they think, this is myself. When the neutral feeling ceases, they think, myself has disappeared. So those who say, feeling is myself, regard as self that which is evidently impermanent, a mixture of pleasure and pain, and liable to rise and fall. That is why it is not acceptable to regard feeling as self. It becomes obvious that feeling cannot be self. It is out of control. It is a dependently originated phenomenon, depending on all kinds of cause and conditions. This is the argument he makes here. And so this is what we see, this is what we can see, says the Buddha in the meditation. It's very hard to disagree with this argument, but at the same time, it's also hard to really relate to it. Yeah. If I say it now, maybe you think, yeah, so what? Because I'm not sure if that's what you think, but maybe that's what you think, because it doesn't really penetrate very deeply. Yeah, okay, I can sort of see it, but not really understand it. So why is that? Why is it that it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't really have that powerful effect on us? And the answer is that we don't really see it. It logically makes sense, but actually in our experience, we haven't really experienced this properly yet. And this is the problem. This is where the whole idea of samadhi, of calming the mind down, all of that falls into place. Then these kind of things start to stand out and they become clear to us. So, having this intellectual knowledge is like, yeah, okay, maybe, whatever. Go back home and kind of shrug your shoulders and forget about it later on. And it doesn't have that impact on us. And this is kind of the problem. So this teaching here is really for people whose meditation is already incredibly profound. When they hear this, it might trigger that enlightenment moment, just like that. If you want to read a sutta which talks about this, it's the Dighanaka Sutta. Dighanaka means literally long nails. And this was apparently a cousin of the Buddha. And he goes to the Buddha to hear a discourse. And the Buddha teaches him a discourse on the impermanence of feeling. And as he does that, when the Sariputta is standing in the background, he's fanning the Buddha. It's one of the things the Upataks did in those days. You haven't been fanning me, Piotr. You should bring the fan out, and then you sort of this is one of the jobs of the Upatak. No need for that. I was messing around, it's fine. So they would fan each other, right? And in the Indian heat, you need that. In the Belgium, you don't need that because it's not so hot, but in India, you would need that. And of course, the advantage was you would be able to hear all these marvelous discourses by the Buddha. He gives the Dighanaka, and as he is listening to the discourse on the impermanence of feeling, precisely because the meditation of Venerable Sariputta was extraordinarily profound. He was a real master of meditation. He gets it, he gets enlightened on the spot. Yeah. So when you're ready, you hear this, bang, it may happen to you. So I don't know if did anyone get enlightened when you heard this? Okay. Well, so next time, yeah. So you come back next time before we go down there. So I didn't get enlightened myself, actually. I had to admit that kind of. It would have been, yeah. Anyway, I think if I asked that question, did anyone get enlightened? I don't think the person who got enlightened would answer anyway. They would probably just sit in the corner, listening out, and be very happy. We'll never hear from them again, probably. So one of the little things here that is, one little thing I want to point out. Sujata translated it as liable to rise and fall. Yeah, and I'm not very happy with that translation. The Pali word don't actually mean rise and fall. What they mean is arise and end. And arising and ending is quite different from rise and fall. These are discussions I had with Ajahn Brahmali on a number of occasions, because he was very much against this translation of rise and fall. And rise and fall is like if you have the ocean, the waves rise and fall on the ocean, but the ocean is always there. That's not really the point. The point is that the ocean comes into existence, and then the ocean disappears. That is the real point. So rise and fall is too weak to really translate Udayavaya, which actually means, and you know this in the context in the sutta, that it must mean that. It means arising, in other words, coming into existence and then disappearing. Okay, so that is why it is not acceptable to regard feeling as self. And then Buddha carries on. Now, as to those who say feeling is definitely not myself, so we have three kinds of people, right? The thinker says feeling is myself, and now we come to the second kind of people who say feeling is definitely not myself. My feeling does not experience feeling. You should say this to them. But Reverend, where there is nothing felt at all, would the thought I am occur there? No, sir. That is why it is not acceptable to regard self as that which does not experience feeling. So here, this is a little bit tricky here, but the idea here is that if there is no feeling, there is no experience. And you cannot have the idea of self in regard to no experience at all. All experience has some kind of feeling to it. If you end feeling, nothing at all happens. Can you have a sense of self towards nothing? This is not the experience of nothing, this is actual nothing. There's a big difference between experiencing nothing and actual nothing. And the answer is no, because nothing is just the ending of things. You cannot take the ending as the self. So this is the point that the Buddha is making here. Now there's a little kind of thing here which is very important. And this little thing which makes the entire difference between this little paragraph to understand it correctly. It says, where there is nothing felt at all, would the thought I am occur there? Of course not. We cannot think about that. But then, based on that, some people would argue, well, in a jhana state, you don't think I am, because there's no thinking. So therefore, the jhana state is not self, because all you have is bliss. So jhana must be nirvana, Very common, I think, problem in the Buddhist world everywhere, taking the jhanas, taking deep samadhi to be nirvana, very common. And this would be one reason, okay, I don't think I am, so surely it is not self. But actually, this translation here is not quite right. You can see I disagree a lot here with Bhante Sujato, so I apologize, Bhante Sujato, please don't hold this against me. So really, the proper translation here is really, and this actually is the meaning of the word anyway, it is that, but Reverend, where there is nothing felt at all, would the thought I am occur in regard to that. In other words, it happens after you come out of the samadhi attainment, after you had an experience of everything ending, can you think back and take that as I am? And that is the critical difference, because it makes the whole difference in understanding this passage right. And this is the difference between, I mentioned the other day, the asmiman anusaya, the underlying tendency to the conceit I am. Asmimana means the conceit I am, the conceit that we think we exist. And that asmimana is what happens when you come out of a samadhi state and you think back upon it. That asmimana comes back because it is an underlying tendency, and it takes that samadhi specifically as I am. This is myself. And this is exactly what happens around so many places in the world. It happens if you go into the famous ancient Indian traditions, where they say that the deep samadhi states, this is the self that you find, that it is the same as Brahman, and then when you die, you kind of unify with Brahman, all these kind of things. Very common in the Vedanta tradition. It is also very common in Buddhism, because everyone wants, the majority of people want to see the self, We're very attached to this idea. So if there's any opportunity at all to grab onto a sense of self, guaranteed people will do it. So this is kind of a subtle, very important point that makes this passage far more richer and far more to the point. So would the thought I am occur in regard to that which is not felt? No, sir. That is why it is not acceptable to regard self as that which does not experience feeling. Now we come to the third person. I'm going to finish this off at least a little bit before we come to the end. Otherwise, we are never going to. We have too much to do. So now, as to those who say feeling is definitely not myself, but it's not that myself does not experience feeling. Myself feels it, or myself is liable to feeling. Yeah? Self is separate, but still it feels. Yeah? You should say to them, suppose feeling were to totally and utterly cease without anything left over. When there's no feeling at all, with a cessation of feeling, would the thought, I am this, occur there? This is very similar to the previous one, right? And the point here is that even if you consider yourself as separate from feeling, if there is no feeling, actually there is nothing at all. So the idea that somehow you can have a self that is separate from feeling, actually it is impossible, because once feeling is gone, there is no consciousness. There is no mental activity. There is nothing in which that perception can occur, even after you come out of it. So whether you are not feeling at all, whether your senses, your sense of self is completely separate from feeling, or your self is not feeling but is subject to it doesn't make any difference. The same argument is used that once feeling is stopped, there can't be no sense of self anymore. It must also disappear. No, sir. That is why it is not acceptable to regard self as that which is liable to feel. Let's finish off this passage. Not regarding anything in this way, they don't grasp at anything in the world. Not grasping, they are not anxious. Not being anxious, then personally become extinguished. They understand that rebirth is ended. The spiritual journey has been completed. What had to be done has been done. There is no return to any state of existence. This is the standard way that the end of the path is described in the suttas. Again and again and again it's described in this way. So once you understand and you have this insight into feelings in this way, enlightenment ensues from that. This is kind of the argument I've been making all along. You see it in this way, you don't grasp at anything in the world, because really nothing in the world is interesting. You let go of everything. It's the paṭicca-samuppāda. The Pali word here is actually anupadya, which is the opposite of upada, not grasping at anything in the world. Because of that, you're not anxious. Paṭicca-samuppāda means like a shaking of the mind, a kind of anxiety about things. No more anxiety. You are relaxed about everything. Thank goodness it's all dukkha out there. Thank goodness it's all dukkha out there. Is that kind of a cool saying? Now I understand it's all dukkha. Wow, now I understand. Wow, what bliss to understand everything is suffering. That is kind of what this means, right? It sounds really contradictory, but that's what's going on. And when you do that, you become personally extinguished. Would you like to become personally extinguished? So maybe you don't seem too concerned anymore. Maybe you're kind of understanding what's going on here. Maybe you're kind of all relaxed now and become personally extinguished. Kind of say, you started to get to the point of this teaching, which is great. And when you do that, what you understand is rebirth is ended. This is such an important part in this teaching. Now we're getting a little bit away from the main import or the main importance of this teaching. But this idea that awakening, what does it actually mean? Well, the main thing it means is the understanding that rebirth is ended. If you look at how it is described, it's always the same thing. Rebirth is ended. And then it says the spiritual journey has been completed. Okay, that doesn't really say all that much. What had to be done has been done. Okay, doesn't really add all that much. And then it says there is no return to any state of existence. That's also like rebirth. So essentially, the insight you have when you awaken is that rebirth has come to an end. That is what it means to be extinguished, to become an arahant. And you know that that has happened because you know that the causes that lead to rebirth have come to an end. So that's kind of important, right? So if you take rebirth out of the equation and you think rebirth, yeah, rebirth, just ancient superstition. Actually, the whole idea of awakening doesn't make any sense anymore. It becomes really, everything really falls apart, right? And it's what I said before, take one of the pillars of Buddhism out and you have to rebuild that house of Buddhism from the ground up because things don't really make any sense anymore. That is exactly what happens with some people who call themselves Buddhist, but in my opinion, not Buddhist at all. I've got into trouble for saying that to people. You don't believe in rebirth? Maybe you're not a Buddhist. I said, what? I want to define Buddhism in my way. But the thing is that if you cannot just define Buddhism in your way. You know, it's like I believe in Thor and Odin and I call myself a Buddhist. Well, that doesn't make any sense. There has to be some kind of meaning to these terms. And if you put any meaning into them, they become meaningless. And this is kind of the point. So if you want to worship the devil and still call yourself a Buddhist, well, you have to ask yourself whether it makes any sense to do that. So I disagree with this idea that we can completely self-identify. Yes, you can self-identify to some extent, but it has to be within certain boundaries. If you lose all boundaries, everything becomes meaningless. Words must have a certain meaning. If they don't have any meaning, we are incapable of talking about things properly anymore. And rebirth, when you take refuge in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, which means becoming a Buddhist or being a Buddhist, taking refuge in the Buddha Dhamma means that you take seriously what the Buddha taught. At least you don't reject rebirth. At least you don't think it is an ancient superstition to be thrown out. At the very least, you're open to the possibility. Then you're on the right track. Yeah. Anyway, this is one of my kind of hobby horses. I talk about these things too much sometimes. All right, so let me stop there because we're getting on to a slightly different topic. Otherwise, we're going to be going on for a long time. So let us have a break, maybe 10 minutes as usual. It's 1/4 now, so maybe 25 past, but we'll see if I can get in 10 minutes. Ready? Okay, just take your time. Yeah. Oh, start reading. Ready? Okay. Okay, so let's do some Q&A and see where that gets us. So, this is the question from yesterday, first of all, as she goes off. Could it be that Ajahn used a cause, not the cause of craving, because there are Bhavatanha and Vimala as causes of dukkha? Yes, but true. There are all of those things, but these things are also included in craving, right? So craving is either of 6 kinds or it is of 3 kinds, and there are really equivalents, which we actually saw in the sutta yesterday. So when the Buddha used the word craving, it really includes all of those. And in fact, it is already mentioned in the suttas. So the cause of, even the cause of Vimala ultimately is feeling. Yeah, it feels good to have a self, and because it feels good to have a self, and it affirms those kind of views and things about the self, because it feels good, you have a craving to exist. Yeah, it comes from feeling ultimately. If you had no feeling, you couldn't have a craving to exist either. Yeah? It ultimately comes because you want to feel. Yeah, feeling is enjoyable, all these kind of things. Vimala is the same. You have a predominance of too much suffering in your life, and then you want to end it all. So it actually, ultimately, even these things are caused by feeling, then leading to becoming the cause, the essential cause. The idea that I think Ajahn is coming from is that there are many causes for almost everything in the world, and that is true. And insofar as that is true, a cause is correct. But the point really is today is that there is one cause that is more important than anything else. That is precisely why you have dependent origination, because there are causes that stand out as the significant one, the sufficient cause that must lead to the result, the cause that when you take it away, destroys the result. Yeah, that's kind of what this is about. So, yes. All right, dear Ajahn, can I still hug my parents if I ordain? Sure, absolutely. What about female friends? That's a little bit more dodgy. Parents, no problem. Yeah, sister, probably okay. Yeah. Female friends, like ex-girlfriends, that sort of thing. It's kind of a little bit dangerous territory. Yeah. Female friends, it depends on whether you are male or female. I haven't even thought about that. If you are female, no problem, you can hug your female friends. If you are male, I think it's best not to hug your female friends, too dangerous. So. Okay, so there's all these other kind of things as well. So you basically, I keep forgetting about this, that there are, okay, we'll talk about that then. And so whatever, basically, if there is a danger that something might lead you down the garden path and then make you attracted, attached, and give rise to desires, all these kind of things, that's where you have to be careful, kind of obvious, yeah? So whatever that is, whatever your sexuality is, and whatever all of these things are, you kind of get the idea that you have to be careful with just not kind of tempting fate, as they say here. Yes. Also, do you have any advice on how to tell my parents about wanting to ordain? Thank you. How to tell your parents about wanting to ordain. I guess just have to take leave.
No.
It doesn't say. I don't know. Maybe not even. Maybe I don't know. So the thing is that I think the biggest shock to my parents when I decided to ordain was that they didn't know anything about Buddhism. They thought they had no idea, right? They kind of been in Norway or they've been around the world in many places, not in any Buddhist countries, they had no idea about Buddhism. And so they thought that, when I became a Buddhist monk, I thought I was disappearing into some kind of evil cult or something like that. That's pretty much what they thought. Buddhism, that sounds like some evil Asian cult. And of course the answer is no. So one of the most important things is actually planning to educate your parents about what Buddhism really is about. Yeah? And it's such a sensible teaching, such a beautiful teaching, yeah? And just a little bit of education, yeah? Get them to listen to Ajahn Brahmali talk, yeah? That is for everyone, full of jokes, full of stories, and how can they not kind of, be, at least they will laugh, yeah? when they hear the Ajahn Brahmali talk, yeah? And they probably will get some of the point as well at the same time. So I think we just basically need to educate people about Buddhism. And when you make the point that actually you're entering this path where what you want to do is live a life of kindness, of care, of doing the right thing, of being kinder even to your parents, all of these kind of things, they probably think it's awesome that you want to ordain. They say, sadhu, they say, they will kind of say, go forth quickly. Yeah, don't wait. Why are you waiting? What are you waiting for? That's what they should say, at least. So it is about really getting a feeling for what the path is about. And it's, and sometimes people think, yeah, if you ordain, that means you are a failure in the world. It's the opposite. If you ordain, that is when you can really be beneficial for the world in a much more profound sense. How beneficial can it be for the world if you live ordinary life? Actually, it is quite limited. But if you practice really, really well, at the very least, you can become a very inspiring person. People can look at you and say, wow, look at that. Gee, even if you don't say a word, right? You never give a talk in your life. Still, just by your mere presence, you will be inspiring. And then on top of that, if you can give talks, great. And so actually, what we can do as monastics far outweighs anything anyone can do in lay life. And we don't get that. It's interesting because in Buddhist countries, it's very often, you go to Sri Lanka, and it's kind of the idea is that if you have a child that is really intelligent, don't become a monk. Yeah, you're too smart to become a monk. And kind of the third or fourth child is kind of really a bit kind of dull or whatever. And okay, you can go forward becoming a monk. Yeah. It's the other way around, right? The intelligent one, that's the one that should become monk. The dumb one, okay, you better stay in lay life because that's more appropriate for lay life. That is the right way of thinking. They don't think like that because the people don't really understand where happiness is to be found. We don't really understand what is going on. If Buddhism was taught better in Asian countries, I think Thailand is a little bit different there. Okay, go forward is a wonderful thing, but maybe even there, I think for men it is, for women are good. But what if you have a very smart son? Do they want them to go forward, or do they want them to have a good career? What do parents say? If you're really smart, if you're the
For men, if before they get married, they, their parents want them to ordain first, to be a monk temporarily, months or, few months or whatever.
What about becoming monk for life? Is that okay?
If they don't want to get married, then they can become, But they will support if their son want to be ordained for life.
If you have a really smart son who can do really well, it's still kind of say, please become a monk. That's still a good thing.
Well, they usually, they don't force, or they don't have any much to say about. But they most likely will support whatever, at least, ordain temporarily, and if the son want to ordain the long term, that would be great. But for the woman to ordain, not many support. Some even against. They don't want, before the woman, like the Thai woman, ordain only the 8 precept, the white robe, they call Mechi. Even that, even the Mechi, most people, they don't really have a lot of respect, because they said that the woman, they come to ordain because, heartbroken, no education, poor, or something like that. So in the old days, they don't really get much respect. But now, for the woman can be a bhikkhuni, samaneri bhikkhuni, people don't really support. Only some support, but mostly no. They don't think, it's a good idea to ordain, because you are a woman, you should stay home, take care of the children, the parents, because the men, they have freedom, right? The son, they have the freedom to go off to be monks, but for the daughters, they have responsibility to take care of the parents, grandparents, grandchildren, children. So it's hard for the woman to just leave to be for many reasons, and too much responsibility. But if you are a man, you don't take. Men usually don't like responsibilities, right? They don't think it's their responsibility. It's the daughter.
I'm going to take that microphone.
It's true. Sometimes, I heard like a husband and wife, they were still married, but and then they have like, a lot of debts or something. Man left to ordain, stay in the temple, and the wife have to work, make money to pay off the debts. So I used to tell her many things about about that. And then, she still support him at the temple, even though she had to work, hard to make money to support the children and also pay off the debt. The man just there, chanting and meditating over it. So sometimes, you feel kind of. But also in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan used to tell me when I met them, like in Sri Lanka or in Burma, they saw the Sri Lankan monks, and they came and talked to me, because they said that, well, for the men to ordain there, because their family are poor, so they send their son, to the temple, still very young, like 10, 10, 11 years old up to live in the temple and then ordained as a samanera. And then, you know, when they are 20, then they become a monk. They ordain as a monk. So they say, they ordain because their family are very poor. Yeah, the Sri Lankan men in the town. But I think it's true because in many Sri Lankan families, they are poor. They are very poor. So, you know, one way is to get rid of some responsibility to send their son to live in the temple and learn from there. That's good for the son. So they learn from they're very young, 10, 11 years old up. They ordain as a novice. Then when they're 20 years old, then they ordain as monk. So, you know, it's up to the culture, on the local culture and belief, you know. But for I don't know about in the West, why yeah.
I think what Ajahn Brahmali said is very true. It's like parents and citizens, like, oh my God, what's this? Some kind of something like that. But I later heard a very good strategy, which I from Ajahn Brahmali. He said, like, well, find this book, Open Door to Your Heart, or the Chapter of the Dhamma, and then leave it somewhere in an obvious place. He just says, like, don't touch that. That's my religious book. That you're not allowed to touch that. And then they won't be able to resist because they're not very worried about you. So they can open it up and read it, and then they won't be able to put it down. In my case, it was slightly different because there's a man here in Belgium who has translated Dhamma into Dutch. And he asked me to write a foreword, which I did. And when my mom heard about it, she was suddenly interested in that book. So I gave her a copy of the book, and they started reading it, and they actually liked it. And especially for some reason, the chapter on old age and death. So when after my mother passed away, my dad started cleaning up all her books because he had like masses of books. And it's like, well, that one has to stay. That one I like. So yeah, he still reads the Dhammapada since then. And it was I'm very grateful to this translator for asking me and giving me this opportunity to bring it to my parents.
Yeah, that's really nice. So, so in one way, one of the big things about the West compared to Thailand is that in the West, when your parents get old, there's healthcare. They can kind of look after your parents anyway. You don't actually.
You don't?
In Thailand was more difficult, right? You have to look after your parents much more.
No, so, not because we have to. It's the, you know, culture and the gratitude, because your parents take care of us, right?
But the culture will change, just like it has in the West. You know, 100 years ago was exactly like that in the West as well. You had to look after your parents. So, but things change over time. So maybe in the future, like in Singapore, it's a classic example. Chinese culture, very important to look after your parents. But these days, everyone just goes off to the old age home, and then so it's kind of changing. Things change so fast. Anyway, maybe it will change in Thailand. Who knows? So, but yeah, it's well, Chinese culture also very difficult to ordain. If you are a young man and you say to your parents you want to ordain, they will not allow you to ordain very often. Yeah? Chinese culture very strongly kind of, it's only the dum-dums who become monastics. So if you have any prospect at all in life, even whatever, there's no way you're going to become a monk.
Yeah, they want them to do business.
They want to do business, that's right. Well, they can be doctors and do business and become lawyers or whatever. And the last thing, the very bottom of the list comes to monk at the very bottom. Everything else fails, then monk, okay, become a monk then. So, but if they really understood what was going on, they would put monk and nun at the very top of the list, yeah. And this shows you the degree of misunderstanding what these teachings are about. I always say I teach a lot of Chinese people because I go to Singapore very often, I go to Hong Kong quite a lot, I go to Malaysia a lot, I go to Indonesia, all of these places, most of the people who come to the talks have some kind of Chinese background, yeah. And so I always tell them, if your son wants to go forward, you should say, go, what haven't you asked already? Yeah, get yourself to the monastery now. Yeah, you should have gone a long time ago. That is the right attitude, yeah. Because you really understand what this is about. This is about the meaning of life. Being a doctor or being a lawyer is still part of samsara, carrying on, going round and round. Anyway, enough of that question. So I think hopefully you have some strategies there, and let's see what happens. Leave the good, bad, and no's on the coffee table at home and say, don't touch it. That's a nice strategy. It's an Ajahn Brahmali strategy. Okay, but it's kind of fascinating. I'm just thinking about my own life. I decided to become a monk. I was stubborn, of course. Sometimes it's good to be stubborn. Okay, I'm going to go whether my parents want to or not. But what is interesting is how people come around. Yeah, if you live in the right way, you do the right thing. Even though they were really against it initially, eventually they were basically Buddhists. So my father was basically Buddhist. My father would listen to my talks online. And it was much better than any Christian can say. He said, oh, this Christian priest, they're not talking anything interesting. But your talks, yeah, this is the way to go. So it's kind of nice. My father sort of became my disciple, listening to my talks. And then when I go back home and I would be with my family, they would say, okay, give a talk. Lead us in meditation. Okay, give a talk. So my whole family comes around, my brother, my sister, my mother, my father, all the kind of in-laws, and everyone is there. It's very different to give a talk to your family than it is to give to a kind of a Buddhist group, right? It's a very different feeling. Yeah. It's a kind of, okay. You become more, I think, a bit more self-conscious almost in the family. It's weird because normally in the family is where you feel more natural, but when you have to be the teacher in your family, actually it makes you more self-conscious than you would in a normal talk. It's very strange. So anyway, so my father, he was basically Buddhist. My brother, basically Buddhist. I'm going to give a weekend retreat, and also when I go there, he's coming on the retreat, which is really, really cool. I said I'm going to visit my mother. The first thing she said to me was, okay, when you come, we're going to have to do some meditation together. I said, okay, yes, ma'am, we're going to do that. So and that is so nice, and you realize that if your parents are open-minded people who are, of course, they're going to be rejected in the beginning, have no idea what's going on. But then once they understand what is going on, they come around. It's beautiful to see that shift. It took a long time. It took about 10 years at least before things started to happen. But then it started to happen. Once they start to see that you are serious about this, it's not just a passing phase, and that's kind of what happens when you're young. You have all these passing phases, just a passing phase, doing all these dodgy things. But no, it wasn't really a passing phase. Anyway, let's go on to the next one. When I hear the suttas, I think they must have had an incredible intellectual spiritual culture in India 2,500 years ago. Why aren't these texts more widely known and studied outside Buddhist circles? Good point. Why not? They should be, right? I fully agree with you. I think, but basically because people probably not really aware of what is going on. They're not aware of the availability of these texts. They don't know what they are. One of the problems in the Buddhist world, as I mentioned early on, is that the vast majority of people follow the Acharya-vada, the doctrine of the teachers, rather than the Buddha-vachana. And because of that, many monastics don't know about the word of the Buddha. Ajahn Sujata told me some stories from Thailand, and you can sometimes you can ask people, they don't even know the basic things like Majjhima middle-length sayings. Because they just follow the teacher, they don't really know anything about the scriptures at all. Very, very common in the Buddhist world. And some people in the West have taken on that kind of attitude because they have learned the Dhamma from the West, from Asia, and they've taken those attitudes on them. So I would say, okay, go to Asia, take on the good things, but where they have gone wrong, don't take the bad things as well. Every culture, every society has both good and bad sides. Take the good things But don't forget your judgment. Yeah, it's important to have some judgment in these things. So it is our job really to make them more readily available and more widely known. This is what we have to do. And so this is kind of Bhante Sujato's, one of his great missions in life is to make everything available on the internet. He once told me that the Christians, there is about 50 or 100 versions of the Bible available on the internet, all kind of different versions, all kind of different languages. There was nothing in Buddhism. The whole Paṭicca wasn't even available once on the internet. There was some websites like Access to Insight that started to make suttas available, but it was not a complete set of the paṭicca-suttas. So he said, okay, I'm going to change that. And he has been very successful single-handedly. He created what is now probably the world's #1 website for going to the suttas, sutta-central.net. And not only do the suttas there exist in Pali and the original languages of Buddhism, they exist in translation into a vast number of languages, more and more. They exist in Norwegian there, because the Norwegian translation of the Paṭicca. Yeah? There's a Norwegian fellow who translates of the Pali. Yeah? They exist in Dutch. Is that right? Yeah, Dutch and Thai.
Not that many. Dutch are copyright.
Okay, you have to write to the copyright law and say release.
Yeah.
Get them to. Are you tried already? Okay. Yeah. Get some powerful lawyers on board. Are there lawyers in there? No lawyers, okay. Oh, get some powerful lawyers can write some really nasty letters. No, don't do that. I'm just messing around with it. No, yeah, you're right. We should do that. But have loving kindness as the motivation behind, but the actual language is kind of straight to the point. You know what I mean? That's true. Are you translating? No. Okay. That's okay.
Well, if I could say something that Ajahn Sujato, maybe he doesn't understand. Like in the Buddhist culture, like, if you grow up around the Buddhists, you grow up with many traditions, ritual tradition and all. And that's how they live. The monks will teach, the first one is dana, to make, to give, to be generous. And that's how they live their life. And mostly people that go to the temple are villagers in the small, the city people, they don't go to the temple as much because they have to work, right? But the villagers will go to the temple. And unlike, Westerners, when they come to ordain, and they just go for the teaching, right? They don't care, they don't know much, or they don't care much about the tradition, the Buddhist tradition and local tradition. And that's why, if you go ask them about Majjhima-paṭicca-samuppāda, they probably talk in Thai, and Ajahn Sujato probably don't know, Majjhima-paṭicca-samuppāda in Thai is what, right? Yeah. Because, usually a Westerner, when they come to Buddhism, they go to the principle, to the meditation and to the principle of Buddhism. But that's not how, if you live in the Buddhist society and live with the culture, and we don't go to the, to the highest, to the main principle directly, but, in their daily life, in their daily living, how we use the simple term, but not, technical like the Westerner like to go after. They use very technical word and they use the term in Pali and all. So that's why we often the Asian and then the Buddhist Asian will be judged by the Western. Or, the Thais, or especially the Thais, many of them go to Thailand to learn, right? The Thais don't know anything, about the Buddhism, about the principle, about this and that. Because, the villagers are, they're simple people. They don't get much education in those days, so they just learn how to read, just like Ajahn Chah, only 4th grade, right? So even Ajahn Chah, 4th grade, imagine, the local people. So that even Ajahn Chah, he doesn't teach out of the Tipitaka, like from the Buddha, right? He doesn't teach that. He just teach simple things, what we experience in life, like, through all your senses. And that's what the Dhamma is all about. Not about the technical term, not from the Pali, not from the, Majjhima Paṭicca, Nikāya, or, the very technical manual, the technical text. So that's what, I often heard about the Western monks always judge. We get judged all the time. All the time, don't even know about anything about Buddhism. Then just have Ajahn Chah, only 4th grade. And he doesn't teach anything about, from the Majjhima Paṭicca or, Nikāya or whatever. He doesn't teach that. He just teaches things very simple. His Dhamma is very simple. Things that we experience, everyone experience in life. And that's all the Dhamma is all about. Not about, the technical term and this and that. Okay? That's all I want to say about.
Yeah, I think when we talk about these things, it's not really a judgment. It's just a matter of see what is there. And of course, one of the wonderful things about countries like Thailand is that we have so many Buddhist masters, people who are practicing pretty well. That is what was attractive to Westerners in the first place. That's why you go to Thailand to learn from these Buddhist masters.
Well-known teachers like Ajahn Man, Ajahn Mahabua, they all very simple people, not high education at all.
Yeah.
Maybe 4th grade. That's just about what they
exactly.
have.
So it's wonderful when it does kind of create masters like that. It's great, and it's actually absolutely wonderful. But the downside is that if you have a teacher who teaches but who gets it all wrong, then you don't have any recourse to anything to understand, to know what the teacher is wrong, because you follow the teacher. He was very much into the sutta.
Yeah.
So I think that this is why I say the most powerful thing in Buddhism is not one or the other, it's both together. You have the scriptural tradition from the Buddha, and then you have the living tradition. And when those two things come together, it becomes kind of really, really powerful, because then you kind of then balance each other, and it allows you to kind of know that the teaching is true, and also to know that the teacher is true as well. All right, time is going fast, so let's go on to the next one. How much is the influence of Hindu religion in Buddhism? The influence is mostly that the Buddha, that the Buddha reacted to the prevailing society. The Buddha, when he speaks, he has to teach people, and of course it has to be in accordance with their culture, with their understanding, with their beliefs. And if he wants to teach a new way, then he has to kind of compare his teaching to what already existed. He has to kind of show how it is different, all these kind of things. So a lot of the things that you find in the suttas are going to be a response to the existing religion in ancient India. So that is kind of one of the main influences, the fact that it is a response. So very often, if you want to understand the Buddha's teachings, if you have some idea of the existing culture, the Vedas, the Upanishads, and these existing scriptures, it makes it easier to understand why the Buddha taught the way he did it, because he was responding to an existing culture at that time. So this is one kind of influence, but it doesn't mean that the Dhamma itself is influenced by Hinduism that way. The other influence is purely linguistic. So a lot of the terminology that is used in the suttas by the Buddha, that terminology is taken on board by the Buddha, and then he will redefine it, in terms of kind of the new insights that he has. So words like jhana get a new meaning in Buddhism compared to what they had before. The word arahant gets a new meaning compared to what they had before. The word tathagata, lots of words. He obviously has to use the existing vocabulary and then give it some kind of new meaning. This is the other influence. The other thing I was saying the other day was that you have all of these gods, and their names are the same in the Buddhist suttas compared to the ancient Indian religion. And I don't think that is so much, that may be some degree of influence there, but I think what happened is that, gods are gods, and whatever name they have is kind of irrelevant. You might as well take on the existing names. It doesn't mean that what is really important is your attitude to those gods. And that is kind of what matters. That is where Buddhism changes the attitude. You don't ask the gods for favors anymore, that kind of thing. That is really the difference. So not so much, I would say. All right, so now finally coming to today's questions. Okay, I'm going to go fast. That's only the beginning. So let's see what we can do. Oh, question 1, question 2. This is already so many, and then each one has more than one question. Okay, I mean, we are in trouble then. So as always, if you please feel free to leave at any time if it goes on for too long for you, because I just carry on a little bit longer, because otherwise we'll never get through all of these questions. Is conviction one possible translation for sutta? Yes, that is absolutely a possible translation. It lacks a little bit of the feeling aspect of sutta. The idea of faith is that it brings in the kind of feeling aspect. Conviction doesn't necessarily have any feeling. It can be quite dry and intellectual conviction. Question number 2. Can you explain again the 4 kinds of situational awareness mentioned in the commentaries? What was the difference between the first 2? Okay, the first 2, the difference is actually very small, and that's why I didn't really talk much about that. But the difference is, one is like is a purpose of something. The other one is a suitability. So for example, that you do something, the purpose is to receive alms food. So you go into the village to receive alms. And then the suitability is, well, is it the right time and the right place? Where should I go for alms food? Is this the right village? Is it suitable today? Is there many things? Is there a festival going on there? Whatever. So purpose, first of all, there is a good purpose, which is to receive alms food. Okay, that's fine. And then there's a suitability of doing a particular thing to achieve that purpose. Where do I go for alms food, etc. So that is the main difference between the 2. So in general, we can kind of merge them together because they're very closely related to each other. So purpose and suitability. Is this going to be good for my spiritual practice or not? That's basically the question we can ask yourself. And then the 2 other ones are called chara, which means like having the meditation subject in mind at all times. That really happens just in meditation. And the last one is asamoha, the non-delusion, which then happens when you come closer to the insight practices. Okay. Ajahn, how a stream enterer knows in the next life that he or she is a stream enterer? Thank you for all the teachings. How they know? Maybe they don't know. They just are a stream enterer. Maybe you don't need to know. Maybe because stream entry is not as clear-cut as awakening, the full awakening. So probably you don't know. You just are a stream enterer. What does it mean to be a stream enterer if you don't know? Well, what it means is that you have already a right view. So you will see the world in a different way because you have destroyed certain tendencies in the mind. And because you have a right view, you will automatically do the right thing without knowing that. You don't have to know that you are a stream enterer. That's kind of the knowledge is irrelevant. What matters is that your mind has been permanently changed and it can never change back again then. So you know the path, you know what you have to do. You will automatically practice samadhi. You will automatically be kind and do all the right things then. because this is kind of part of your psychology. Can't get rid of it anymore. Cannot avoid being kind, which is kind of nice. Can make small mistakes, nothing major. You know. Is it true that when a bhikkhuni disrobes, she can't go forth anymore? Well, the bhikkhu can do that as many times as his wishes. I haven't answered that, but do any of the bhikkhunis like to answer the question? Yeah. It's a very simple argument. It's a simple argument. It's found in the bhikkhuni Kantaka, yeah, where you have where all these questions are raised, and in there the commentary to this one, the bhikkhuni disrobes, and then it doesn't say anything more. The commentary says that she cannot go back again. And then there's a second case just after that, which says that if a bhikkhuni goes over to another sect of the religion with her robes on, then she can no longer be ordained as a bhikkhuni. And then the commentary assumes that those two, both of these are to be read, and that you cannot come back again later on. But there is actually no evidence in the suttas that you cannot reordain, or in the Vidya that you cannot reordain as a bhikkhuni. So I say that this is just a commentarial tradition that does not have to be followed. I think to me it's fairly obvious when reading the suttas.
Reordain as somebody.
Yeah, you can realize, sure, you can realize something, but it's kind of, it's nice to be able to be a bhikkhuni as well, if you want to be a bhikkhuni. Where a bhikkhuni reordains? I don't think so, but there is very little, information on bhikkhunis in general, and even for the bhikkhu, it's very rare that you see anything about reordination. So I don't think that would mean anything if it isn't found. But, yeah. But to me, it is very obvious that that actually is not, not there. So I say you can ordain and you can reordain. Okay, dear Ajahn, can you explain the differences between the stream entry and the arahant, and maybe in other stages of awakening? Okay, so stream entry is when you see the Dhamma for the first time. Yeah, you have a very deep, profound experience of samadhi. You come out, you review that experience. You look at your whole experience in terms of impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and non-self. Bam, you get the eye of the Dhamma. Dhamma chakku arises. Everything that is of nature to arise has a nature to cease. Yankinchi samudra dhammang sabbantang nirodha dhammang, the standard way of explanation of the horizon of the Dhamma chakku, the suttas. So you see reality, but just because you have seen something, it means you have a right view. Now you know exactly what the world is like. If someone asks you a question and you say, is there a self, or where is the self, you know exactly what to answer. You know that the five khandhas are empty of a self. But the tendencies of the mind are very strong. Yeah? So even though you have seen that, the tendency to think in terms of I, perceive in terms of I, and this kind of thing still linger in the mind. And so the last part of the path from stream entry all the way to arahant is to overcome those lingering tendencies of the mind, perceptions and thought that still revolve around the idea of I. But there's a nice simile in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, 22nd chapter, Kanta Samyutta, the Samyutta, the connected discourses on the 5 aspects of personality, the Kantas. Sutta number 88, maybe, something like that, 89, or 87, 86, Kemaka Sutta, it's known as. And in the Sutta, this monk Kemaka, or one of his mates, or one of the people there, talks about precisely this difference. And the simile they use is that when you have washed a cloth, in the old days, and they washed it with cow dung, which is kind of interesting, right? Cow dung has certain antiseptic qualities, so it's good to use for washing, as washing powder is the wrong word, washing whatever, washing kind of ingredients. So you washed it with cow dung, and of course the smell afterwards is not going to be perfect because cow dung is still not kind of maybe the ideal smell. So you put it away, and so the washing is becoming a stream entry. That's when you have washed your cloth, and then you put it away in a scented casket, yeah, in a scented kind of chamber where there is with a perfume, if you like, yeah. And then after some time, the cow dung smell disappears, and the smell becomes completely sweet and nice. And that is the difference between the stream entry and arahant. You have to wait for that scent of I, the thoughts of I, the perceptions of I to disappear. It takes a certain amount of time. If you keep on practicing hard, it can go very quickly. You can become arahant very quickly. If you don't practice, then it will happen in the maximum of 7 lifetimes. So that's really the difference. So the stream entry has seen non-self, but the self-view is still there. The self-thinking and perceptions are still there to some extent. And that's why the stream entry still has many of the consequences of that self-perception. Still has some degree of desires and greed. Yeah, you can still live a married life, for example, being a stream entry. Still have some degree of anger and ill will. Still have various of these defilements that ordinary people have. And then you become a Sakadagami, once returner. And once returner means returning once to the sensory realm, not anywhere else, specifically to the sensory realm. And they have decreased their sensual desire and ill will even further, almost to the point where they are kind of almost gone completely. Then you become an anagami, which is a non-returner, which means you will be reborn at the very least in the Brahma Loka, the jhana realms. They have completely ended desire for sensory pleasures and completely ended ill will. Yeah. Very, very close to enlightenment. No ill will or sensory desire whatsoever, but still a little bit of craving for existence. That is the remaining thing there. The desire to be reborn, the bhava tanha. Still a little bit of bhava tanha there in your mind. So still want to exist. That is the very last thing that we get rid of, is the desire for existence. There's a little bit of restlessness with that, because if you have bhava tanha, it is natural that your mind gets a little bit agitated and things.
I think the easiest way to get rid of I is you to erase.
What?
Yes.
No more I.
Yeah. That is it's a good starting point, but it's not going to take you all the way to the end of the path. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Dear Ajahn, I am wondering if animals generate karma. When a predator, for instance, a wolf, kills their prey, they do it all the time. Is it possible for them to be reborn in a higher realm? That's an interesting question, and my guess is that even as an animal, you are bound to make some karma. How can you not make karma? You're doing things, yeah, and you are. There is an intention there, and it's not a beautiful intention to kill other beings. So there must be some karma, but I think it's a very, very weak kind of karma. Yeah, they are just following habits that don't really know what they're doing. They don't really understand that they're causing all this kind of suffering in the world. So it's probably a very weak kind of karma, much weaker than what we have as human beings, because we have much more understanding of what is going on. And so it's going to be far worse for us. So probably maybe a little bit of bad karma. But not much. So that is one of the reasons why you're going to be stuck in the animal realm for a long time. Yeah. The Buddha says that one of the great disasters in the world is actually to be reborn in the animal realm or in the hell realm, especially if it is because of some habitual bad karma that you have done. If you haven't made much good karma, then you're likely to get stuck for a long, long time. This is probably one of the reasons why once you get there, you are stuck for a long time. So, going a little bit faster now. My grandma has had a life full of extreme suffering. She used to have a lot of anger before she started to have dementia 2 years ago. Now she seems to suffer much less and to be more at ease and peaceful. But do you think our suffering is really reduced when our brain does not function properly? Or is it just stored and to be taken to the next life? I think maybe her suffering is kind of just blotted out a little bit by her dementia. A lot of the suffering she had before may have been due to the past. Usually the suffering is often related to past trauma and past difficulties. Yeah? A lot of people have had difficult lives. So by blotting out those memories, and maybe that is why she is not suffering so much anymore. Yeah? And in her next life, what will happen? It's very hard to say what will happen in her next life. But it is likely that some of those memories will kind of be there at the back of her mind, deeply embedded. So she may very well come into her next life as well and have a sense of suffering. Yeah? That's kind of the downside, because the habit of the mind is so strong, and those things will still be there in the background somewhere, even if she cannot remember specific events. One of the problems is that, when she dies, then some of those memories will come back again to her. And that's going to be very interesting to see, maybe traumatic for her to actually die, because if she dies, those memories come back, and she, it may be difficult. So that will be kind of fascinating to see. There's something known as terminal lucidity. The idea of terminal lucidity is this very known idea. In fact, apparently among geriatrics especially, that when you come very close to death, you become lucid at the very end. If you are an Alzheimer's patient, you have dementia, the very end of your life, you become lucid. It's a very strange thing, right? It's really weird from a modern medical point of view. It doesn't really make much sense. But from a Buddhist kind of point of view, it does make sense, because you kind of let it go of your body. Your mind is kind of moving on into its next existence. Because you're letting go of the body, that demented brain doesn't really have a grip on you anymore. So your mind gets back its lucidity. Prior to that, the mind is trapped in the body, which makes the mind not being able to express itself, is trapped by that brain, which is damaged. But the moment you kind of start to withdraw from that body, your clarity comes back. So this would be interesting in the case of your grandma, to see what actually happens to her as she dies. That would be very, I don't know what will happen there. It's kind of interesting at the very least. But it doesn't mean that she would necessarily have a bad rebirth. Anger itself is not necessarily a very, very bad thing, as long as you are still able to live well despite your anger. And some people are able to do that. Then you may still actually be fine in terms of what the rebirth process. I will just, is that for the same person? I can put the handwriting is the same, so I'll just shuffle things a little bit around there. No? Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. I don't recognize the handwriting. Usually when people come from my retreat, I recognize the handwriting straight away who it is and ask the question. But on this retreat, not yet. So I have to come back to Belgium a few times and I will know who it is. Anyway, it's much better not to know, actually. So, dear Ajahn, how do you interpret the supernormal powers described in the Kebatta Sutta? If I'm not mistaken, they are presented as normal developments of the concentrated mind, and I find that hard to believe. Okay, well, that's fair enough. You find it hard to believe. Okay, so they depends on your character. I mean, these things seem to have very much to do with character and what is natural. You look at some of the great disciples of the Buddha, Venerable Sariputta. He didn't have any psychic powers whatsoever, but he was super duper skillful in samadhi practice. He had the most powerful samadhis. He went to the complete cessation of everything came out. And still, he said in one sutta, I said, I can't see a mud goblin even. Mud goblin is supposed to be the lowest of low of psychic powers. The first thing you learn when you get psychic powers is to see mud goblins. Mud goblins. It's a particular type of kind of ghost, the mud goblin. But that's what he said. It kind of like he said that in a sutta, I can't even see mud goblins. That's what he said. So it seems to be kind of the most basic thing you're supposed to see. I'm just making it up, really. But that's a little bit making it up. But that's kind of the But Venerable Mahavajjana, whose meditation was not as powerful in terms of samadhi, he had incredible psychic powers. He was like #1 in psychic powers. So this has to do with personal inclination and personal interest, and all of these kind of things, many things. But essentially, if you want to develop supernormal powers, what the most best starting point is the fourth jhana, according to the sutras. When you get to the fourth jhana, that's really the kind of the starting point of all that. So should you develop supernormal powers? Some of them are good to develop, like the recollection of past life. That is one of the supernormal powers. It's like avidya, the child of India, the 6 supernormal powers. Recollection of past life is very, very useful because you understand something about suffering when you see your past lives. So for those of you who are a bit unsure about past lives, you check it out, and get into the fourth jhana, and when you see it, wow, you don't have any doubts anymore. And if you don't see it, well, then your doubts will continue. So this is the way really to do that. So there are some of these supernormal powers that are really useful. The ones that are not really useful is kind of to fly through the air. Is it? Okay. Okay. Talk about flying through the air and how you do it.
Can you do that? Ajahn Brahmali used to tell a story.
Yes.
That monk at Bodhiana, that some other monk saw this monk meditating, and then he flying to the Dhammasala. It's a Piccoli place. Yeah, he told the story, and then
This is interesting. This is interesting for everyone. Okay, this is exactly why I don't trust any stories about psychic powers, because they're always so dodgy and so absurd. I know Ajahn Brahmali really well, so I know how dodgy these stories are. I'm not going to. Stories are stories. Reality is something else very often. Whenever I hear a story about psychic powers, I usually lose interest straight away. These are the things that people want to see. People want to see psychic powers, and in my experience, all stories of psychic powers should be taken with a massive truckload of salt, because it's really, really dodgy. So have that truckload of salt ready. So Venerable Vimala reckons it is really useful, and I would say maybe if you don't have a passport, that's true, but it's a lot of hard work. It's probably easier to go to the passport.
I don't know if you've ever tried to get an American visa.
Okay.
It takes you the whole day, and you have to go through it.
Yeah, best not to go to America, maybe then that's kind of good result. So,
It's Australian. Can go to America?
You can, you can, in theory. Is it a visa? I think maybe the new passport will not be a visa anymore. Yeah, I think both my Norwegian passport and my Australian passport both are actually okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting a bit sidetracked. So essentially, some of these psychic powers are not. I would recommend these things that are not certainly the core part of the Buddhist life. And the Buddhist path, I think, like reading other people's minds. If you want to kind of read rubbish, great. You read other people's minds. If you know what goes on in your own mind, it's enough rubbish already. You don't need to know what goes on in other people's minds, right? It's already enough. There's a story, I don't know if you heard that story. Again, this is just a story. It's just as unreliable, probably maybe even more unreliable as the one that will put you were just saying. So you think it's reliable? Yeah. But this other story was a story of apparently a man who spontaneously started to read other people's minds. This was in India, apparently. I guess that can happen if you have some kind of real powerful stillness in a past life. You develop that stillness, you learn to read minds, it may happen spontaneously in this life. And apparently, initially it was really cool. You could go around, you could figure out what the people everyone was thinking, you know exactly what their mind was like. But then he after a while, he got fed up. He realized actually there's not much point in reading people's mind. It's just like, you know exactly what's going to be in there because everyone is all the same. We think that we are different. We think that my secret is like really super secret. I don't want anyone to read my mind. But actually, it's exactly the same as everyone else has. And so after a while, he got really fed up with reading people's mind because it was all rubbish anyway. But he couldn't turn it off anymore. Oh, that was dukkha. Couldn't turn it off, right? Oh, he had to read all those minds, but he didn't want to. And that was really problematic, he said that. So that's kind of, so psychic powers, I don't know, it's dodgy. And anyway, in the Kavatta Sutta, as you say here, you don't actually say it, but in the Kavatta Sutta, the Buddha has very interesting things to say about psychic powers. You know what that is? Can you remember that? Yeah, he says, he doesn't say only that it's useless. He says in the Kavatta Sutta, he says that I am disgusted, I am bored, I am really, really down on psychic powers. That's kind of literally what he says in there. So it's a very strong statement that psychic powers are not really useful, except if they are those psychic powers that are part of the path. Remembering past lives, understanding the laws of karma. I'll carry on for another few minutes and then I will stop. Okay, so thank you, dear Ajahn, for the teachings about the cause and conditions of the ignorance today. I realize most of our children are going to school to learn untrue teaching by many ignorant people. Our child was even disrespected and discriminated for her compassionate quality. How can I keep up sending her to those teachings, knowing that they are a flame, a charcoal pit? I think we have to learn ourselves to deal with life. Yeah, and your daughter, was it your daughter? You said our children, daughter, whatever it was. My child. Okay, so her is a daughter. So you just have to realize that as you go through life, you will pick up things. You will start learning about suffering. You will start to learn the problems. And actually, the school of life is a useful one to learn about all these issues. As long as you have the ballast, on the other hand, of access to good spiritual teachings, if you have both of those things together, it's dynamite, because you see the problems of life and you see the solution given in the Buddha's teachings. The two coming together is very useful. So I wouldn't be too concerned. You're going to meet ignorant people, whatever you do in life. Yeah, that's just part of existence. And as long as she has a good mom or dad, I don't know which one, who can give her some guidance in the right direction, she is really, really fortunate, incredibly fortunate to have that. And don't try too hard to make her into a Buddhist, because then she will reject it. Just be a good example for her, and you kind of do the very best you can do that. So I would say, don't be too concerned. So, all right. Next one. A self that is not feeling, but that which feels. Is the Buddha saying that essentially a self has to feel like something, pleasant, neutral, or whatever? No, the idea is that the self is one thing, but it is subject to feeling. It is like this is my body, but it is subject to drinking water. Yeah, I am not this water, but I'm subject to drinking it. I can kind of drink it. I can feel the water, but I don't regard the water as myself. I experience the water, but I don't regard it as myself. In the same way, you have a self, but that feeling, you don't see it as yourself. In the same way as I don't regard this water as myself, even though I can drink it. Yeah. So you can experience feeling, but your actual self is something else. That's the idea. That which feels, but is not itself, not feeling. It kind of feels, but it's not itself feeling. That's kind of the point, yeah. is a nothing burger in the absence of feeling. Yeah? A nothing burger in the absence of feeling. Yes, I guess it is nothing in the absence of feeling, because once feeling is gone, well, there is nothing. Yeah, so you cannot really talk about the self in the absence of feeling. Yeah? It's like saying you have a self without any discernible characteristic. That doesn't feel like anything. Yeah, yeah, it's a bit like that. If you have a self that has no characteristics, you don't have a self. Yeah, because by definition, it must have a characteristic, otherwise it doesn't exist. Anything that doesn't have any characteristics doesn't exist. That's really the end of the story. Yeah. Okay, I will actually finish off because just 2 questions left. Okay, thank you for your beautiful teaching about non-self. I am equally inspired by the teaching by which Thich Nhat Hanh and the Buddhist scholar Joanna Macy about interbeing, a deep ecology based on the Paṭicca-samuppāda Sutra of the Buddha. It's actually not of the Buddha. This is a Mahayana Sutra that came later on. It's not really by the Buddha, but anyway, it is a Buddhist Sutra done by the Buddhist community somehow. Interbeing, to the implicit order, everything is inside each other. Deep ecology by the Norwegian philosopher Arne Næsja, I know of him, he's very famous in Norway, which referred to the great system view of the world, recognizing our embeddedness in nature. Love to hear your thoughts about them. Yeah, I mean, the idea of interconnectedness and interbeing, the fact that everything is interconnected, is very useful in the sense of looking after the world and looking after the planet and looking after plants and animals and ourselves and everything. Yeah, and so in that sense, yes, it is very, very useful. I fully agree. Yeah? And if some of the teachings of the Paṭicca Sutta makes people better at looking after the world, wonderful. Read the Paṭicca Sutta. If that inspires you in that way. And so that's wonderful. By looking after the world, we are making good karma, yeah, because you're doing good things. So you are building your spiritual path at the same time doing good for the world. And of course, all of that is wonderful and marvelous. We should all do more of these kind of things. So I don't see any kind of problem there. So carry on and do good, live well, practice the path, save the planet. Then we're doing everything at the same time. Whether we can save the planet is, of course, a different matter. That is highly uncertain, but at least we can try. We can give our input to maximize the chances of things going at the least bad possible, I suppose. Last question for today. As a Buddhist, should we abandon the usage of soul as terminology? Depends how you use it. If you use it to talk about wrong view, then you can use it. But if you use it to talk about the mind, then probably you should not use it. Because soul usually implies, like, I mean, the problem with the word soul, it is so badly defined. I tried to find a definition of it once because I was wondering whether I could use it to translate atta in the suttas as soul, but it was so diffuse and so uncertain and so hard to really pin it down. But the way I tend to see it is that it kind of is about the essence of who you are as a person. That's your soul, your essential being. And it usually implies some kind of permanent aspect, the real human. And as such, of course, no, we can't use it to refer to the mind. Yeah, the mind, because the mind is not that, doesn't have those characteristics according to the Buddhist teachings. So probably, I would say, don't use soul. Maybe you can use soul as a translation for non, for the wrong view of self, for atta, but not for the mind. Okay, everyone, enough for tonight. So I wish you all again a very good night's rest, and we'll see you back again tomorrow morning. So let's finish off the day as usual by doing the unravels. Or Venerable Vimala wants to say something.
So 1, 2, 3. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhaṃ Bhagavatam Abhidhammi Akato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangham Namami